Alright, what's up YouTube? It's time for a review of the new Anthrax album, For All Kings, out last Friday, February 26th. Now, if you don't want to watch me babble about it for fucking 13 minutes or whatever, I've actually linked a blog review of it down in the description if you'd rather read a review with words rather than watch this mug for however amount of time. So this is the band's 11th studio album, their 6th with singer Joey Belladonna, following the return to form of 2011's Worship Music, which, I mean, return to form is like the fucking understatement of the century. You know, every so often an album comes along that actually lives up to its unspeakable hype. And in 2011, Worship Music was definitely that album. It was on the verge of becoming the fucking Chinese democracy of thrash metal. But when it finally dropped, it did not disappoint anybody. To me, I mean, this is a controversial opinion, but this is the best Anthrax album that was ever made. Yes, including Spreading the Disease, Persistence of Time, Among the Living. If you want to hear me talk a little bit more about Worship Music, I will actually link a video I did almost a fucking year ago now. It was the top 5 modern albums by classic hard rock and heavy metal bands. So that link will be over there. Okay, Anthrax. To me, one of the main things that has always distinguished them amongst their thrash metal peers is the vocals. When you compare them to the rest of the Big Four, or if you want to include Exodus, Testament, Overkill, the Big 7, Death Angel, Big 8, any of the major thrash bands, if you compare actual vocal abilities, it's not even fucking close, whether it's Joey Belladonna or it's John Bush. Every vocalist is unique and brings what they need to their various bands, whether it's Tom Araya or Dave Mustaine or James Hetfield. They all serve their bands well, but if we're talking pure vocal ability, Belladonna and Bush both blow everybody out of the water. It's like listening to, especially Joey Belladonna, it's like listening to Bruce Dickinson sing over thrash metal. It's honestly incredible. And shout out to John Bush, because some of those Bush era albums are really great. If you've only heard the Belladonna stuff, get Sound of White Noise. You will not be disappointed. So having a singer like Bush or like Belladonna, who's currently back in the band, it's afforded Anthrax the ability to be slightly more tuneful than a lot of their thrash peers. And that's kind of the main thing in my mind that always sets them apart when I think of them. Although what I do want to avoid here is a discussion of the band's legacy in comparison to their peers, and more just evaluate this new album, For All Kings, as a singular entity in the context it sits in 2016. And quite frankly, after reviewing that fucking new Macklemore album, my ears need a bit of a cleansing, so let's get started. So of these 11 tracks, they only leaked 2, which is just such a charmingly retro rollout, which I love. We're metalheads. We do not need to cater to the Beyoncés and the Drakes. We are real fans who go out and buy physical products on the day they come out, regardless of what we've heard. So kudos to Anthrax and the record label for just being, God forbid, a little more traditional. We got 2 great tastes in Evil Twin, which is the 6th track on here, and Breathing Lightning, which is the 4th track. First single was Evil Twin, back in October. I'll also throw a blog write-up that I did of just of that single. If you want a little bit more of an in-depth analysis of it, I'll throw that in the description. But it found Anthrax lyrically making a bit of a political statement against what the lyrics call ideology used as a weapon, addressing all the extremism that's going on in the world. But musically, it's a pounding, pulsating, completely noticeably balls out song the whole way through, beginning to end. Anthrax plays with a lot of dynamics on this album, but Evil Twin is the song that goes for the throat. We have like this pounding, pulsating groove in the chorus. It's almost like the best headache ever. That's what Benanti's grooves, Charlie Benanti, the drummer's grooves, sound like in this chorus. The song also features a very heavy Slayer-style breakdown, and it was also our first taste of what newcomer Jon Donais, formerly of Shadows Fall, was going to sound like playing lead guitar on an Anthrax album. He replaced in 2013 the very talented Rob Caggiano. To me, especially because I'm very familiar with his work in Shadows Fall, he's a more noodly, slightly more technical player than Rob. And we'll get to it a bit later, but this ends up being a much more lead guitar heavy album, possibly because of the addition of John. But, you know, even though I wasn't worried, his solo on Evil Twin is ripping. His playing on the rest of the album, which we'll get to again later, is phenomenal. Second single was Breathing Lightning, which it had some really catchy ass riffing. One of the best Scott Ian riffs on this album, but it also had this chorus that was like basically radio ready, which is not at all a bad thing, especially in contrast with the balls out first single. What's interesting is that these 2 singles were very well chosen because they end up being two of the album's best tracks by far. Alright, so moving on from the singles, just bear with me with this analogy. For All Kings is put together kind of like a baseball lineup. If you don't know what I'm talking about, in baseball you talk about the heart of the order, that batters number 3 to like 5 or 6 are the most powerful hitters in the lineup. And then they're rounded out by a good introduction with speedier runners who can get on base. And then you have, like, especially at least in the National League, you have the fucking pitcher hitting last. And this album is very similar to that concept in that you have two good openers, particularly Monster at the End is one of my favorite choruses of the whole album. But then you have this stretch that starts with like the second half of the title track and runs to Defend, Avenge. That's just this murderer's row of tracks that really is the centerpiece of the album. So we've already talked briefly about the singles, Evil Twin and Breathing Lightning, which both fit into this row of songs. But then you also have a song like Defend, Avenge, which in my opinion has the best riff on the whole album, with Scott Ian's kind of up-tempo take on Master of Reality era Black Sabbath. Then you have a song right in the middle, sandwiched between these two singles, Suzerain, which has some really meaty riffing and some monstrous sounding drumming from Charlie Benante. You know, he doesn't really get as much props, but he's really in that elite Dave Lombardo thrash drumming category, and he is a vital ingredient to this band that people sometimes forget about. But he arguably, you listen to a song like Gung Ho from Spreading the Disease, or one of those early tracks, he was one of the pioneers of the thrash blast beat. Then you have the epic Blood Eagle Wings, track 7 off this thing, which they actually just released a video for today. If we're going to do a little bit of comparison to worship music, this song is very much the in the end of For All Kings. It's huge, it's epic, it's dramatic, and quite frankly, it's a song that, with Belladonna's magnificent vocals, only Anthrax, if we're talking thrash, only Anthrax could truly pull off. And they do. It's one of the highlights of the album. And that's the thing. In a lot of ways, Joey Belladonna is the most important aspect to making this album what it is. Because even when the rest of the band seems to kind of lose a step, like the title track, which gets a little repetitive, and then you have a later song, like This Battle Chose Us, which gets a little boring, even when it seems like they've kind of lost a step or slowed down, you know there's a huge Belladonna chorus kind of lurking around the corner. He takes these already great thrash tunes to totally new heights. And in my humble opinion, this is the best he has sounded to date on an Anthrax album. You listen to Among the Living, it's a great album, but the vocals are kind of weak, especially if you compare him to what he's done on these last two albums. It's really not even close. But time to talk now about the latest addition to the band, Jon Donais, whose lead playing is all over this thing and is a noticeable, marked change to the band's sound. And like I said before, Jon is a little bit more of a noodly, technical, flashy lead guitarist than Caggiano was, but that's not at all a bad thing. In fact, it has resulted in a more lead guitar heavy album than Anthrax has really ever had. There's these big, long, extended solos in some of these songs. Like, You Gotta Believe, just when that song starts to kind of drag a bit, you get this big lead over various grooves from Jon. He just rips. He also delivers an appropriately larger-than-life solo on Blood Eagle Wings, probably the apex of the album. There's a really fun, squealing, harmonic-heavy solo in Monster at the End. And Suzerain made me smile because there's this lead, this speed-picking lead that very much sounds like something he would have played in Shadows Fall, which is definitely a band I miss dearly. I mean, both Caggiano and Jon Donais are great players, so whether this change is a positive or it's negative is completely up to the listener. It's a little more up my alley because I'm a guitarist and I love listening to guitar-heavy bands. That's why Megadeth is quite possibly my favorite band of all time. But after this stellar chunk of tracks in the middle here, the album does unfortunately slow down a bit with these final 3 songs. All of Them Thieves is incredibly boring filler. This Battle Shows Us doesn't offer anything besides a good Belladonna chorus. Now it could be that these are decent thrash tunes that are simply living in the shadow of some really truly essential Anthrax songs in Breathing Lightning and Blood-Soaked Wings and Evil Twin. It's quite possible, but it is a noticeable drop-off as the album kind of ends. We wrap things up with Zero Tolerance, which shout out to the great Death song on the album Symbolic. That's instantly where my mind went when I saw that title. It definitely closes the album out in chaotic fashion, although a lot of it kind of feels like aggression for aggression's sake. It almost sounds like Anthrax trying to be Slayer at times. And these last 3 songs are passable, but as soon as the album ends, each listen it's become more apparent for me. It leaves you aching to go back to that middle heart of the order, if you will. But I suppose you could say that's a pretty minor gripe. The fact that there's some songs here that are so excellent that they make pretty good thrash tunes sound kind of boring. You know, would you rather have a consistent album where every song is pretty good, or would you rather have some real standouts and some real forgettable songs? It's an interesting thing as a listener. You really don't know because there's arguments for both. Now, pound for pound, this album is not worship music, but it comes dangerously close. This is more than a worthy follow-up. What it comes down to is that worship music was just a little more consistent in that if you disregard the hymns and the interludes, it had 10 unique, awesome tracks that all stood on their own and all contributed something to the album. And For All Kings just has a couple filler songs, and that's unfortunately really what it just comes down to. So calling this a step down feels cheap because worship music set quite a bar. So I'd rather just categorize this as a very worthy follow-up that succeeds in further establishing Anthrax's legacy and their current presence in metal. Now, you can't deny that Anthrax is definitely going head up with Megadeth in that within a month, both bands, half of the big four, released new material. So who won? That seems to be a conversation. For my money, and am I as biased as they come? Sure. For my money, Megadeth slightly edged them out. But I use the term slightly, not lightly, as I bust these flows because I'm rocking my NWA hat. Anthrax made an excellent album nonetheless, and even if it doesn't quite have the abundance of greatness that was present on worship music, no fans should be disappointed by this. And most importantly, I want to see this in the Billboard Top 5, so get your copy while it is still the first week, because this would be a great statement for metal to make to the rest of the world. And the latest change to these reviews, times they are a-changing, changes come, whatever cliche you want to use applies to this right now. I'm adding scores to these reviews. I think it is a really helpful thing, not only for me to have a more accurate understanding of my own feelings towards an album, but it's also helpful to the viewers. Because everyone kind of has a rating system and a scale, and if you're able to compare how I feel about this album to like a Megadeth album or anything, it kind of just puts everything in perspective, at least when it comes to my personal taste as a fan. So welcome back, Anthrax. For All Kings gets a 7 out of 10 from me. As always, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe, leave a comment, shoot me a message so we can continue to talk music, and I'll see you guys soon.